Well, good morning and welcome to our webinar, Transforming Workplace Conflict. This is Keith Ayres from Integro, and I just thought I might mention that what you can see on the screen at the moment, you've got two ladies there, and they've got these halos. This is something new that Wiley introduced at the conference last year, and it's possible, I think, to get those halos to actually put on photographs. The lady on the left is a DI style, as you can see there's more green than there is red, but there's a bit of red and green in her halo. And then the lady on the right has red and blue, meaning I and S. So she would be an IS style. Okay, just a little bit of trivia there to start off the session. Okay, so I want to dive straight in. Let's look at the agenda for today. Great. Here's the agenda. Okay, number one thing, what is the drag on today's workplace with conflict? Wiley's actually done some more research on conflict, or gathered more research on conflict in the workplace. And so I'm going to be starting off by sharing some of that with you, and some of the things that we're learning are actually happening in the workplace as a result of conflict. We're then going to look at what is the difference between conflict resolution and productive conflict. Because we've had conflict resolution training around for a long, long time. And you probably have done some of that in your organisation. So how does productive conflict differ from that? We're then going to focus in on the everything disproductive conflict learning experience, not just the profile, but the actual learning experience for participants going through a workshop based on the profile. And then summarising with next steps. So that's the agenda for today. We'll always start off a session to talk about productive conflict with what comes to mind when you think about conflict. And here are a few examples of the responses that people have come up with. You'll notice there's not much positive in there, isn't it? And if you actually, if I go to the next slide, the reason is, of the 12,000 people surveyed, over 90% of the responses were negative, all right? And if you think about that in terms of DISC styles, we tend to think that the D style, dominant style, is the only one that likes conflict. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they actually like it, but they don't avoid it. They're likely to dive into it. Whereas all of the other three styles have different reasons as to why they would actually prefer not to engage in conflict, okay? And there's various kinds of conflict, from drama, which would be really out there, gossiping, which is off on the side, passive aggressive, which could appear like nothing much is happening on the surface, or actually being excluded and being away from the conflict. So 70% of managers, directors and executives said that conflict negatively impacts the efficiency in their department. I actually got into a discussion with the managing director of a firm on a flight back from Melbourne, and he asked me what I did, and I was talking about DISC and stuff like that, and understanding people better. And he said, "Oh boy," he said, "I think we need to talk." He said, "I've got so much conflict in my organisation," and I hadn't even raised the subject of conflict at that point in time. And he said off the top of his head, he would say that 60 to 70% of his time is taken up with conflicts that are escalated to his office that really should be being dealt further down. Okay, they're now a client actually, but it's out there, it's real. Okay, managers, directors and executive say that they spend an average of 3.2 hours a week dealing with conflict. I think this managing director was spending more than that. Okay, so 69% said that their job satisfaction would improve if their co-workers handled conflict more effectively. What's your experience with that? Do you experience conflict in the workplace, and how does it affect your effectiveness and efficiency? Okay. And another statistic that came out of the survey was that 40% of people said that they had left a job because of unhealthy conflict. All right, that's pretty costly. And one of the teams that I did 5 behaviours of a cohesive team with a couple of years ago actually approached us about doing it because they had had 2 or 3 members of their executive team leave over the past 12 months because of the degree of conflict that was going on in that team. Okay, it's costly. All right, so conflict is an uncomfortable yet unavoidable part of everyday workplace. If you've got people, there's obviously going to be some conflict at some point in time. So organisations need to learn how to effectively navigate conflict in order to thrive, rather than letting it be a drain on the culture and on people. All right, so let's look at conflict resolution. All right, it's the process of resolving a dispute without confrontation. So let's get together and resolve it. It's reactively addressing conflict after it's actually happened. And often involves negotiation, mediation, or arbitration after a conflict has occurred. So we get the people together who've had the conflict, and then someone walks them through a process to attempt to resolve it. So it aims to eliminate conflict with a step-by-step process and make it go away. Right? Productive conflict is very different from that. It's in the moment. It's an open exchange of different ideas and opinions in a constructive way. Productively engaging in conflict in the moment. So it's happening now. How do we deal with it productively after the fact? To feel equally heard, respected, and unafraid to voice dissenting opinions. And it strives to reach a mutually comfortable solution. All right. So the whole thing about our approach to productive conflict is that because conflict is real and it happens, rather than saying, how do we make it go away? Because it's not going to go away. It might go away in a moment, but it's going to come back. How do we learn to, when it comes up, make it a productive interaction and a constructive outcome, rather than having the mindset that we want to get rid of conflict? Okay. Does that make sense? All right, so the recipe for productive conflict is, first of all, each individual understanding themselves and others and how they react in conflict. It's recognizing destructive thoughts and habitual responses. So when conflict is negative or destructive, it's because something's happened and a person's habitual thoughts, the automatic thoughts that pop into their mind, result in the habitual reaction that we would call a destructive response, all right? And we all have those. It's then catching and reframing those thoughts in the moment when it's actually happening and saying, oh, maybe I need to question that thought, all right? And we'll obviously see how that works. And then choose a more productive response. And again, through practice, we can learn to what are those productive responses that are available to me so that I can choose one of those rather than react out of a destructive response. And so it's maintaining a commitment to finding a mutually comfortable solution. Okay, so that's the recipe. Introducing the productive conflict profile and the facilitator kit. You'll see in the background there the front cover of a productive conflict profile for a person called Ruby Prescott. Now, that is the sample report. It's if you have an Epic account, if you go into your Epic account to produce a sample report, it'll be the Ruby Prescott profile that we'll download. All right, and I'm going to use Ruby as our example for today. Okay, so the actual learning process for using this profile is, first of all, the assessment. Individuals take the assessment for the productive conflict profile. They then get their profile, and hopefully that would be as part of a facilitation. The facilitator kit has a approximately 4-hour workshop with PowerPoint handouts, although the main handout is actually the profile, because the profile is also a workbook, facilitator's guide, and that's fully scripted, just follow the program. and of course video built into the PowerPoint. And then follow-up tools, tools that can help a person to continue to apply this after they've been through the learning experience. Okay, so the transformational learning model, the assessment. There are core questions to determine a person's DISC style. So extensive research was done to look at how a person's DISC style would impact the way they engage in conflict, right? But also some additional items, product-specific items were added to the assessment. And these are to determine how an individual actually behaves in conflict. So just because you're a particular style doesn't mean that you will always behave in a certain way. You may have learned other ways of dealing with conflict that are not typical of your style. And so that will actually be built into your profile so that the profile is more personalized to you than just the same as everybody else with the same style. All right. Obviously there's commonalities, but there will be some differences. Okay, so let's see how that works. Here's an example of the core questions, and if you've taken any DISC profile, you might recognize these questions. It's a 5-point Likert scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And these are the base items that determine where your dot falls in a DISC profile. These questions are exactly the same as they would be in the workplace profile or management profile, any of the everything DISC profiles, right? And then there's the product specific questions. I should zoom in when I can. So these questions are only in the productive conflict assessment. So when I'm in conflict, I confront the topic without waiting. I wish I could say that. That's not something that I'm really good at. And then when I'm in conflict, I'm still very empathetic with the other person. Now, as an SI style, that's something that I've learned that I tend to do, and sometimes it doesn't work for me, but still, I would have to strongly agree with that as to what I tend to naturally do. Okay, so again, these are the questions about conflict, so the profile can be personalized more towards you and how you might be different from other people with your style. Okay, all right, so on to the second and third stage of the learning model, and that is the profile itself and the facilitation. I'm going to focus on the profile to start with. And there's 3 parts to the profile, and actually 3 stages to the actual facilitation. So first of all, understanding yourself and others in conflict using DISC. Then we're going to look at the destructive conflict responses and recognize those that you might tend to use and those that you might find have the most difficulty dealing with when others use them. And then we're going to look at, well, how do we change that? How do we change our behavior to be more productive when we're in conflict situations? Okay, so first of all, understand, right? Understand conflict using everything DISC productive conflict profile, explore your own DISC style in conflict, and then learn about other DISC styles in conflict. Okay, so Ruby is a D style. Now, I've seen the Ruby Prescott profile for over 1.5 years now, since we first got it as our sample report. And we never had a picture of Ruby before, and I know they've just used a picture, but I didn't envisage, you know how you get a mental picture of someone by their name or their style or whatever? Ruby looks very different in this picture to what I would have expected, but that's by the by. The D style can be insensitive, focused more on task than on people, can create win-lose situations because they're very competitive, become dismissive of others when something goes wrong, and winning arguments is something that's very important to the D style, all right? And we'll see that actually in the profile itself. I never thought about it, but I remember when I first read that in Ruby's report, that winning arguments is really important to her. I thought, well, that makes sense now, of course. That's why they continue on, because they want to win, okay? And so looking at Ruby's profile, first of all, in the page 2, there's an introduction, and it actually gives a definition of conflict there, right? It's a difference of opinions involving strong emotions. That's what we're using as a definition for conflict in this profile. Okay, it's personalized, and it's helping, halfway down that sentence there, it says, rather it's focused on helping you curb destructive thoughts and behaviours so that conflict can come back more productive and improving results in relationships. Okay, like every other profile, we have cornerstone principles. It's an inevitable part of the workplace. Your conflict interactions may be influenced by other factors. It's not just about DISC. It could be hierarchy. It could be your culture, either social culture, organisational culture. It could be the business atmosphere. It could be your own personal experiences of how you've handled conflict in the past. All right. This is point number 3 is really important, and I need to emphasise this, that your response to conflict situations is in your own control. You cannot control how others respond, but you actually do have control about what you do. And that's what this profile is helping people to do better, right? Excuse me. So learning about others' DISC styles can help them understand their conflict behaviours, help you understand their conflict behaviours and how they may differ from your own. And you can have productive conflict by using DISC to more effectively engage with others, all right? So like with every profile, the cornerstone principles lay a foundation for the principles behind the profile and the actual learning experience as well. Okay, so at the bottom of page 2, there's a DISC model introduction overview, like we have in the workplace profile, except here we've also got what each of the styles tends to focus on when in conflict. And as you can see, they're very different. And especially if you look at the opposite styles, there's a big difference between expression and feelings for the I style and justice and logic for the C style. Okay. Helps us understand where they're coming from. Okay, so then on page 3 in the profile, it's similar to page 4 in the workplace profile. You can see where your dot is, and there's a narrative report here. Okay, and I didn't mention this earlier, but around the outside of the DISC map, we have priorities, but these are priorities in conflict, so they're different to the other profiles. So Ruby's number 1 priority is control, backed up by a priority on asserting herself and justification, justifying her point of view in the conflict. You'll notice she has some striped shading on objectivity in the C style. So like with the other profiles, you can have 4 or even 5 priorities in this profile. But the questions that measure the priorities are different to the questions that measure priorities in the other profile. So just because you had an extra priority on a particular style in the workplace profile does not mean it will come up in this profile. Different questions. Okay. And so the narrative report here is focusing on those 4 priorities in Ruby's case. Okay, so it's personalized to her and will include some narrative about her additional priority on objectivity. Okay, and like when we do other profiles, we would get them to personalize it by tick, cross, question mark, etc. Okay. Page 4, like motivators and stressors in the workplace profile, we now look at what's important to you during conflict. And again, we've got a bunch of bullet points there. And here's where we see winning arguments is halfway down Ruby's list there. That's what's important to her. If you're not a D style, you might read those and go, wow, that's interesting. I never knew that, which is what I did when I saw it. It's like, that explains why I have difficulty getting into conflict with someone who's a D style, because it's so different to what's important to me. Okay. And then what drains your energy during conflict, a bit like the stresses in the workplace profile, etc. Okay, so this is getting to understand your own approach to conflict and what's important to you and what drains your energy. So that's really important if I'm going to be more effective at adapting my natural tendency. Page 5 is an overview of each of the styles in conflict, and is looking at the healthy behaviors and unhealthy behaviors, all right? And each style has both healthy and unhealthy behaviours. And to what extent do I use the unhealthy behaviours? When do I do that? And what could I do to learn to use the healthy option instead of the unhealthy option? So some interesting group discussion activity there with the group. Okay, then the next 4 pages look at how you might engage in conflict with each of the 4 styles, all right? And we're going to dive in on the C style, and this is Dave, all right? Now, the C style tends to keep emotions out of discussions, prefer logical debates, and Dave prides himself on his critical thinking skills, his calmness, outward calmness in stressful situations, okay, or conflict situations. So let's look at the page for Dave. First of all, we've got a paragraph about what drives Dave in conflict based on his 3 priorities. In his case, objectivity, stability, and justification. So, and then compared to you, so compared to Ruby, Dave is more self-controlled, similarly analytical and logic-focused, just as good as breaking down irrational arguments, because they both have a priority on justification, right? Less interested in controlling outcomes and less forthright and forceful, right? So there's a page for each of the 4 styles. So this is a great resource as part of the toolkit following up on learning how to use this profile for people to reflect back and say, okay, well, I'm working with this colleague who's an S style. How do they compare to me in a conflict situation, etc.? Okay, so great resources, all right? And at the bottom of each page, it gives you some tips, okay? And you'll see that Ruby's tips here are based on her priorities versus what Dave is looking for to be more effective in conflict, okay? Then we reach page 10, which gives us a summary of the 4 styles, the 4 primary styles, what their goals are, what they overuse and what their fears are, and how that plays out in conflict situations. At the bottom of that page, there's an important activity here that says to think of a conflict situation you were in that you wish you would have handled better, and describe that below. We're going to come back to this because once they have identified a conflict situation that they could have handled better, and how did their DISC style contribute to that? We're now going to look at that a little later on to say, well, what are we learning about how we could have done that differently? Okay, so we're going to have a look at an incident. In Ruby's case, there was an incident with Dave. Ruby's team had a project deadline and she had a plan. When she presented the plan, Dave was concerned with some of the logistics and details around her plan. Ruby didn't think the team had time to consider all this and pushed back on his questions. Dave wanted to ensure that the team got things right before moving forward, but Ruby dismissed his opinions. The 2 became argumentative and Ruby walked out, right? So looking back on that situation, Ruby's saying now that I know how I react in conflict, how can I recognize my destructive conflict behaviors and what triggers them, thinking back on that situation. So the second part of the profile and the workshop focuses on recognizing destructive responses. And firstly, it's automatic thoughts that trigger behavior, right? So identifying and understanding your destructive behaviors will help you learn to recognize the automatic thoughts that cause those behaviors, all right? So let's look at an example here. And this is an example of the C style, okay? So here's Dave. A conflict situation has arisen. He and Ruby were arguing. His automatic thought is, if this situation gets heated, it will be awful, all right? So his feeling is anxiety and his behavior will be to withdraw, all right? That's an instinctive response to his anxiety, is to withdraw. Now, withdrawal is a destructive response because it doesn't do anything about the conflict. Conflict's still there, you're just avoiding it, Okay. Another alternative thought would be, I can wear this person down with superior logic. The feeling would be defiant, and the behavior would be to overpower with logic, okay, and prolong the argument. Let's look at an I style. Here's Ron. Ron does his best to keep things friendly and upbeat. He wants to be well liked, and he's willing to share what's on his mind. The I style tends to naturally be very open, right? And so Ron gets into a conflict situation, and the automatic thought is, you don't care about me. His feeling is undervalued, and he throws a little bit of a tantrum or something, okay? Bit of drama, overreacts to something, okay? The second automatic thought, as an example, is they're making me out to be the bad guy, right? Because they always want to be the good guy. The feeling is insecure, and the resulting behavior would be go gossip to others about what a bad person they are, okay? So this is the example of how the cognitive behavioral approach works, okay? With a conflict situation, there's an automatic thought which triggers a negative feeling, which triggers destructive response, okay? So in the profile on page 11, the person has the option of looking at the 18 destructive responses that were identified by research as the most common destructive responses people use in workplace conflict, okay? And the participant is asked to tick the ones that they have most difficulty dealing with in others, all right? And put a star on those that you tend to use most commonly yourself, all right? And then we go into the 7 personalized pages where these destructive responses are described. And let's zoom in on one of those. Arguing, which is obviously quite common. And because this is Ruby's profile and she's a D, it's saying, like others with a D style, you sometimes have so much confidence in your vision. It's frustrating when others can't see it. All right. And so the automatic thoughts that are likely to trigger this response from Ruby is that, firstly, there's no way I'm backing down, and so continuing to argue, or I don't get it, or don't get you. I'm obviously right, and so continuing to argue. All right. So the automatic thoughts are what's triggering this arguing response. Now, what if a person taking the profile is an S style? Well, the wording is going to be different here. Okay. The automatic thoughts might be the same, but the behavioral reaction will be different. So all of these 18 destructive responses are personalized to the style of the individual who's taken the profile, okay? And while we're here, I just thought I'd add in a revision or an overview of the DISC theory model as we teach in DISC certification these days. and that everything DISC is based on the interpersonal circumplex, widely used psychological model to explain how people interact with others. It's about interpersonal behavior. And the interpersonal circumplex is based on 2 dimensions of personality, or 2 needs we have, which is control and affiliation. All right, so you'll see on the horizontal scale, we have high need for affiliation on the right, low need for affiliation on the left. All right. On the control scale, the vertical scale, we have a high need for control at the top and a low need for control at the bottom, okay? That creates the 4 DISC styles and the needs and fears behind those DISC styles. So as you can see, these automatic thoughts that come up are going to be triggered by your needs and fears, right? And that's going to be different for each of the DISC styles. And that's as much as I wanted to say about the DISC theory model at this point in time, and you can obviously get more information on that from us if you would like. But I just wanted to emphasize that this is why DISC is so much a part of the learning to be more productive in conflict situations. I need to understand my needs and fears, and I need to learn to manage them, especially my fears. All right, because if I succumb to my fears, I won't adapt, and I'll just go back into my natural style. Okay, so page 19 in the profile, it used to be page 18, the revamp has just added an extra page on those destructive responses. This one blew me away when I saw this. When I read through, these are the automatic thoughts that are typical of my style. In this case here, it's Ruby style, the D style, all right? And but when I read through mine as an SI style, I was like, how did they know this about me? Because it's just so accurate, and the majority of people find it that way. It's just the research behind this is amazing. Okay, and then at the bottom of the page there, we've got the reflection again, and now we're going back to that activity we did on page 10. Think back to the conflict situation you described on page 10. What were the automatic thoughts that triggered for you there? Okay, and what was your response to the situation? How did your automatic thoughts influence that response? Okay, so this is like a little case study we're going to take on through the exercise. All right. Okay, so recognizing automatic thoughts. So here's Ruby again. Now that I understand my automatic thoughts influence my behavior, how can I change my response? All right. And so we're going to go to the third step in the learning experience, which is your behavior, changing your behavior and choosing more productive responses. Okay. So first of all, we need practice at catching and reframing automatic responses. All right. And we can help each other. This is a really great tool when used in a team. We had the opportunity to do the productive conflict profile when it was under development as part of a beta test with our own team here at Integro. And it was amazing how once people realized it was okay to have negative reactions, people started being more open about your automatic thought. Well, someone would say, well, what was your automatic thought then? Oh, yeah. And we'd start talking about it. So we're having these really great open conversations. We've got to practice catching and reframing automatic responses, and then continue evaluating and improving our experiences. Okay, so how do we change our response? Right, so we're introducing a new step now. So we're going from the conflict to the automatic thought, but then before reacting, first step back and reframe, and then choose a productive response. And so on page 20, for each person, it's looking at how anger affects their, how they react when they're angry, and anxiety are the two key triggers for these automatic thoughts, okay? So that's a key step. So recognizing it, catching us, and then here's Ruby going to give us an example, okay? And this goes back to her conflict with Dave, all right? Her automatic thought was, you have no idea what you're talking about, all right? So her feeling was to become defiant, and then that triggers an argumentative response, all right? So, but we need Ruby now to rethink this, all right? He may have a different perspective. I need to listen. And so the feeling would switch from being defiant to being open-minded, right? And then she will listen, all right? But we've got to reframe that automatic thought before that's going to happen, right? So then on page 21, all right, we have some really useful tips here on how to reframe. So what change the way we think about the situation, right? Is this thought actually valid or true? Am I overreacting or exaggerating the problem? Is there another way I could look at the situation, okay? And then in the profile, which is also the workbook, you have the opportunity to practice reframing some automatic thoughts that you've been having in past conflicts, okay? And so then we're going to go back to the conflict situation you described on page 10. So we're back to that again. All right, now we identified the automatic thought on page 18. Now we're looking at how do we reframe that? And then what would the behavior be that I would use in this case for Ruby she needs to listen, so she will then listen better to what Dave has to say. Okay, on page 22 here, you can see just above that highlighted box there, there's a whole list of productive responses to conflict. Okay, things that you could try doing after you've reframed the automatic thought. And you'll see it's on a scale. And so the idea there is that participants in the workshop will go through and they'll say, to what extent do I find this easy or difficult to use this? And so identify some productive responses that I could learn to develop and be more effective at using. Okay. So finally, the follow-up tools. On page 23 in the profile, which is the last page, which is headed up, hey, you're not done yet. You'll see there's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And the first one is briefly describe your conflict situation. What were your automatic thoughts? What was your response? And then how did you reframe your automatic thought? Could you have done better? So this is just a little worksheet to keep practicing. Whenever I find myself in a conflict situation, use the worksheet. And that's available in the facilitator kit as a PDF file as well. So it can be printed out to give out to participants for extra copies if they want to. Okay. Oh, I could have zoomed in on that, would have been a lot easier, wouldn't it? Okay. One other tool is a quick reference guide, a little flip book. All right. And these are available to purchase. And when you flip that over, you'll find a page for each of the destructive responses, the 18 destructive responses, a little description, and the automatic thoughts that tend to trigger that. So it's a little desktop piece that you can give out to people who've been through the training, just to remind them to continue to use it. And when they find themselves engaging in some kind of destructive response, they can flip it open to that page and have a look at the automatic thoughts and say, yeah, that's what's going on. How do I reframe that? Okay, just a useful tool for keeping DISC alive. Okay, and then another tool for keeping DISC alive, of course, is myeverythingdisc.com. You can put your productive conflict profile into myeverythingdisc.com as well. At this stage, there are no other additional features in myeverythingdisc.com specifically related to conflict, but of course, if you do comparison reports and then you use the drop-down list to identify situations, one of them is managing tension. So if you've got a bit of tension between you and another teammate, you can use myeverythingdisc.com to reinforce what you learned in the productive conflict session. Okay, so to summarize, Everything DISC productive conflict helps organisations harness the power of conflict. It provides personalised insights from DISC, and it's proven scientifically validated model for behavioural change using cognitive behavioural theory, and it will result in improved relationships and results. Okay. I just want to add, there's a productive conflict case study on our website, and it's a union in the United States that have put hundreds of union members through the productive conflict profile and the training around it, because they realize that conflict on the workplace in the construction industry is very common and also quite dangerous. And so I'd really recommend you have a look at that. There's a video. I would have liked to have played the video, but I don't know yet how to make video work effectively on a webinar. There's also a PDF file, about a 4-page document explaining what they did and how they did and what results they got from it. So if you're interested in learning more about the productive conflict in action in a difficult environment like construction industry on the job site, it's a really great read. Okay, so what does productive conflict look like in your organisation? Or is it productive? What can you do to make it more productive? So I'm going to throw it open to questions there. If you can type into your chat box. Can you see if there's any questions there, please, Sue? No questions. Okay. If you go to your menu in Zoom there, you will find a chat box. Okay. So be happy to answer any questions people have got if you'd like to type them in there. Okay, thank you. We've got a comment there that would like to discuss this with management. That's a great idea. Yeah. It'd be interesting to ask management what impact does conflict in the workplace have on them and their ability to get things done. Excuse me, I've got a question. Excuse me. That time to get a cough. Is it recommended to use the standard disc profile before the disc in conflict? That would be desirable. It's not a must. The program and the profile itself has been designed so you could just do it as a standalone. But I think that a workplace profile, which, let me explain the difference there. The workplace profile is focused on understanding yourself, understanding others, and how to build better relationships, right? And by understanding needs and fears, etc. Okay. The conflict profile is about yourself. Excuse me a sec. Apologies there, I just had to clear my throat. The productive conflict is skills for you that you can take anywhere. One of the most common things I've heard back from people who've done it is it's really helped me with my family relationships as well, and some people, particularly with conflict with their kids. So it's a set of skills that you can use in any aspect of life. And so the whole focus of it is on me learning to be more effective in conflict, but it's also improving my emotional intelligence, right? It's making me more aware of how I react in conflict, what's causing it, and then learning to adapt. That's sort of self-management part of emotional intelligence, is it? And it's also making me more aware of others and the kind of conflict behaviours they're using and what kind of automatic thoughts might be triggering for them, and then learning to manage the relationship better. Okay, the facilitator kit is $1,600. It's obviously something you can use again and again and again. The videos are great. They give some really good illustrations of each of the different styles, with the automatic thoughts popping up on the screen as a bubble that are causing them to descend further and further into a conflict reaction. And they're the kind of examples that people can relate to and say, oh my God, I've done that. And then of course, videos showing people reframing the automatic thought and then coming out with a more productive response. The kit, the profile is 20 epic credits, okay? So what's that, about $130 retail, I would guess. And someone's asked if the slides could be available. I think, yes, some of them we could make available if you'd like to just contact us about what you'd be looking to do with it. The presentation's been put together by Wiley, and we've adapted it for the Australian situation. So. We've got a question here about, does the profile special certification? It's available to anyone who's already using DISC, yeah. And a question about the Ruby Prescott profile. Actually, you could download it from our website, integro.com.au. We have samples of all of the profiles there. But also, if you have an Epic account where you generate your own disc profiles from, you can just look up sample profiles, and you can actually download a sample profile with your own contact details on the front. Yeah, if you are accredited or certified, as they're calling it now, for DISC, you can certainly use the facilitator kit. It's just plug and play, basically. Obviously, you can personalize it. The slides and the handouts and stuff are all templates, so you can add your own coloring and logos and all that kind of stuff to it. But having that deeper understanding of DISC, and I showed you the DISC theory model on purpose because I wanted to make that connection that if people have not done DISC training before and they don't understand the needs-driven behavior side of it, and it's their needs that are triggering those automatic thoughts, they may not have as well. It'll be easier for them if they have that understanding to learn to reframe those automatic thoughts, to be able to step back. You know, like as an S style, I have a fear of conflict and disappointing others and hurting people's feelings and stuff like that. So when I get a tense reaction in a situation, I know straight away what's causing that. And I know that I can push myself through that and move into a productive and more assertive approach, okay? Oh no, is the 4-hour workshop applicable to teams only? No, it can be done with a public workshop. It can be done with any group of people. But if you've done DISC with a team, if you've done a workplace profile with a team, or if you've done 5 behaviours with a team, I'd really encourage you to use productive conflict as another step with that team to take them to another level as a team. All right, it just when you get team members starting to be much more open and transparent about their destructive conflict behaviours and about their automatic thoughts, and just creates so much more openness and trust on the team. Okay. Question here, how do you get a handle on the level of conflict in a particular workplace? Wow, ask people. You could do a survey, and the question is, does it highlight the conflict in the survey? Just talk to people. When I'm doing a 5 behaviours program with a team, I always interview everyone on the team before we meet to do the sessions. And the information I get out of that is incredible, right? I want to know what each team member thinks of how the team is functioning. And of course, in the 5 behaviours model, conflict is the second behaviour, productive conflict, all right? And part of the reason I'm doing that is I want to build trust with them first, which is the foundation of the 5 behaviours model, all right? And when we've got a high level of trust, people are more willing to engage in productive conflict, which is why this profile actually came about, because after Wiley launched 5 behaviours 6 years or so ago, they found that the teams that were doing it found productive conflict one of the most challenging behaviours to use. And so it made sense to develop a profile which would help them use it much, much better, and therefore be more effective in the 5 behaviours of a cohesive team. So. Oh, hey Keith, trying to view the video on Integro website. Under resources and case studies, I'm not familiar enough with the website to visualize it exactly. But if you, Hina, if you want to, yeah, phone in or email support@integro.com.au. And someone will be able to give you a link directly to it. Yeah, it is a really great case study. Good question, Elizabeth. Is there a bundle available for organisations who want to do both workplace and productive conflict? There was, and we did have that message out on our Epic account and in our email newsletters, but it started in March of last year and finished at the 31st of October, unfortunately. It may come up again, and in fact, I know that Wiley are working on a blended solution for, I think, later this year, where we can combine workplace productive conflict and the Everything Disc Agile EQ profile, which is due to launch by the end of this month. So keep your eyes out for that, but I'll let you know when it happens. So if I'm already accredited, I can download the materials. You can download a sample profile. The facilitator kits are something you need to purchase, and that gives you all the PowerPoints, the videos, and all of that, and the facilitator's guide for running a 4-hour session. All right, but information about the profiles and sample brochures, e-brochures we've got for the productive conflict profile, yes, they're available at no cost. I haven't made a decision about the slides to all participants. Daniela, I think I need to look at what Wiley's terms are on that, but we'll get back to you. Okay, looks like there's no more questions. So thanks again for joining us this morning. We got a really good roll-up today, and the screen's frozen again. Oh, there we go. Thank you. There's our contact details, website, email, and free phone number. Okay, 1-800-222-902. Okay. All right, thanks very much. Lovely to have you here, and we'll talk to you all again soon. Okay, thank you.